Hello everyone, to the multitudes of people who are watching and potentially watching this. Welcome to another episode of Wednesday Night Live, Simon Jacobson, a class that has been going on now for over 3 decades. I started teaching this class back in 1982, and it's been an unbroken chain, all word of mouth. So it's been quite a fascinating journey, as I've many times shared. Many lessons you can learn when you start something. It was not planned this way. We had no idea this is what would happen. But it did begin to become a phenomenon, and it continued to teach till this day. So that's the good news. Tonight's class is titled, Do You Know How to Interface? And the reasoning behind this title I'll share in a few moments. But it's a common word today. You hear the word interface. You hear it in the context of technology, the interfaces that different technologies are necessary to interface between different modalities or different paradigms. But the concept actually goes back thousands of years, because it really lies at the heart of one of the biggest questions in life, and that is how to balance the many different forces and demands and expectations that tug us in so many different directions. So this is true all the time, especially in our modern times, where we're literally inundated by a deluge of data and information overload. It becomes increasingly difficult sometimes to find a type of cohesiveness amidst the whole din, amidst the whole fragmentation of so many different forces, as I said, so many different voices. This is both on a personal level, on a psychological level, on an emotional level, and of course, on a practical level. You know, how do you make choices, priorities? How do you connect things? And the fact of the matter is that when a person has many different things going on in their lives, it has to ultimately, that scattered fragmentation has to create some fragmentation in the spirit. Because we're human beings, we like order and we like cohesiveness. So if you had to list everything you did today and said, okay, here are all the activities I did today, from the moment you woke up through the entire day, you'll find 100, 150 items. You woke up in the morning, you exercised, you had breakfast, you got dressed, groomed yourself, commuted, went to work, coffee break, tea break, the whole list of things, everything. You have a whole bunch of little details. Now, it may not seem much in one day, but then when the days accumulate, day after day, and week after week, and month after month, year after year, and decade after decade, you suddenly have millions and millions of fragments. And this doesn't even include, as I said, the psychological battles that we struggle with, the different voices, the different expectations. What's a priority? Is home a priority? Is work a priority? And then, of course, all the other, sometimes even unnecessary turbulence that occupies our lives. And finally, in our day and age, technology. Once upon a time, people lived in a shtetl, they lived in a town. Most people were born and died in the same little town. So they knew a few people, they knew a few hundred people. They did not know of the larger world. Their options were very limited. Their menus were very small, were very short. Today, we know everything all the time, anywhere. There's a constant flow, as I said, a stream of inundating data coming our direction. Today, the problem is actually the other way around. How do you filter it out to know what's important? Once upon a time, it was difficult to find, to access important news. Today, you have everything, and you don't know what's a priority, what's not. So all this tends to create, as I said, overload. It has to overload the circuits. And as a human being, there's only that much where we can focus on. So you can say, okay, you know what, I'll focus on 1 or 2 priorities and ignore the rest. But that also is not a solution. Because we do have, when we have more options, we do include them in our lives. And the question, the challenge is, do you know how to interface? And it really comes down to knowing how to find harmony within the diversity, within all the different forces in our lives, which of course gets to the core of everything, is what is driving you in the first place. Are the details of your life driving your life, or do you have a purpose that drives your life, and the details follow? So all this is part of the theme of this discussion. Why did I choose to speak about it this week? Is because today was in the Hebrew calendar Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Rosh Chodesh Shvat is the day in the year when, which is the new month of Shvat. And every day, as I've discussed many times in the Jewish calendar is not just a symbolic calendar. It's actually a calendar that captures what we call energy. Time is energy. Einstein showed it on a scientific level, but we today know, but long before that, in the Kabbalistic and mystical teachings, time is energy. And it's actually rooted in a statement in the Bible, in the Torah, where it says, by the creation, it says about the 6 days of the week. So it says that God created, it says, 6 days God created heaven and earth. Now if you think of the sentence that I just translated, 6 days God created heaven and earth, there seems to be a missing word. It should say in 6 days, in the period of 6 days. But the verse says sheishis yamim, not bisheshis. So the Zohar, which is the classic text of Jewish mysticism, authored by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and penned by his student Rabbi Abba, says the following. Why does it say sheishis, not bisheshis? Because time itself was created. So the sentence should be read not within 6 days, in a period of 6 days the universe was created, but 6 days were created by God. That means the 6 days themselves. Kol yom v'yom over David, every day is energy. Think of how that changes our entire outlook at time. Most of us see time as calendars, deadlines, beating the clock, a way to measure what you're doing, a way to schedule things, and so on. But time, from a Jewish perspective, is far more than that. Time is invisible energy, because you don't see it, like you would see, for example, space, but nevertheless it's energy. And every moment is another form for another life, for you to use either to the fullest and tap the energy and thus redeem it, or to waste it, God forbid, and then it's like a waste, it's like a dead life. That moment is dead from here on, because it'll never come back again. Should you fill it with the right activity, then the moment lives on forever, because the activity it lives on. That's why the Torah says, in other places it says, when you talk about Abraham, there's again a redundant verse that says, V'Avram Zaken, Baba Yamim. Abraham aged and he came into his days, which seems redundant. It says he aged. What do you need to add Baba Yamim? What does Baba Yamim mean? So the Zohar says the same idea. It says that he aged, we all age. But Abraham had an additional element, that he didn't just age, but every moment he came with complete days. His days were filled with content, with value, with spirit. There were no wasted moments. So as he aged, he didn't just have the years that accumulated, he actually had, he tapped the energy of the time in which he lived to turn them into eternal moments, and that's why we can talk about him today. The people we forget, or we don't even remember, or we never know they existed, is because their time was wasted, and that's it. When they died, they died. So they were present while they were present, but it was over. The people who fill their moments with sanctity, with meaning, with a legacy, a sense of legacy, their moments live on forever. Not the actual moment, but that which the moment was used for. So on a very basic level, it comes down to this. You have today, tomorrow, you have time in your hands, and the question is, will the time that you're given and allotted in this, in whatever day or in your lifetime, will it be filled with something that will be memorable, or will it be filled with something that will never be remembered because it was either wasted or filled with activity that you're not really even proud of? So we Jews we don't just conquer space, we also sanctify time. That's why you have the concept of Mekadesh Yisrael Vazmanim, that Israel is sanctified, and Zmanim, sanctified time in a holiday. Israel inundated Kachinu Zmanim. We sanctify the new moon on Rosh Chodesh. Is the new moon, and then we sanctify it within the week or 2 weeks from the beginning of the month. We sanctify time. Shabbos, Shabbos is sacred time. So time becomes more than just beating the clock, a deadline, an invisible way to measure human activity. Time becomes is energy that is either tapped or not tapped. And as such, every moment in the year has its unique energy. So what is the energy of Rosh Chodesh Shvat today? So sometimes you have to go search and look. There's the Bible itself. The beginning of the 5th book of Chumash, the 5th book called Deuteronomy, or Dvarim, the 5th book, it begins. Everything happens Rosh Chodesh Shvat. What's happening? This is the last 37 days of Moses' life. So it says, in the beginning of the Chodesh Shvat, the Chodesh, which it's not called in the Torah Shvat, it's called the 10th month, the Shvat, Adar Nisan Shvat, Ashtiyasa, the 11th month, because Shvat Adar would be the 12th month, and Nisan begins number 1. So B'yem Ashtiyasa Chodesh, which is in the beginning, Yishin LaChodesh, the first day of the 11th month, which means the month of Shvat, Moses went, and Bayer es HaTorah Hazais. He explained the Torah to the people. And with this begins an entire book of the Torah, which is completely different than the first 4 books. The first 4 books are actually happen in real time. Is the chronology and history of the beginning of creation, from Genesis, through the first book really is covers around 2,000 years. And then the rest of the books, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, or Shmois, Bamidbar, Bamidbar, cover 40 years. The 40 years from the Jews leave Egypt. I mean, the beginning of Exodus is the exile in Egypt, but after they leave Egypt, in the chapters that we are actually reading now, this week's chapter begins with them still in bondage, in exile, and in the middle of the chapter, God tells them this mitzvah of sanctifying the new moon, and it begins a renewal for the Jewish people. They become a nation, freed from Egypt. From here on will be 40 years. The rest of the Torah is all covered in 40 years. Which is interesting that most of the Torah is really the 40 years of their journey in the wilderness. And the Bible will conclude at the end of the book of Numbers, the 4th book, that they arrived at the Jordan River. And finally they arrived after 42 journeys through the 40 years of the wilderness. They arrived at the east bank of the river Jordan, waiting to enter into the promised land. Okay, so what happens next? Next comes Elah Hadvarim. As they're resting there as the east bank, Moses, knowing that in 37 days from now he will pass away, he begins giving his last will and testament. This is Elah. These are the words that Moses spoke. And when is that? Rosh Chodesh Shvat, the first day of the 11th month. And he begins by explaining the Torah. So everything that they had received and experienced in the last few books, Moses now repeats and reviews with additions, with new nuances, with all kinds of other elements. So this entire book called Dvarim, this 5th book, it just covers 37 days. 37 days from the 1st of Shvat till 7th of Adar, when Moses, the Neshama soul, returns to heaven, which is the end of the book of Chumash, of Dvarim. How does it end? Well, Chaya Esther v'Amevsim, that unbelievable moving eulogy of Moshe Rabbeinu, the only man, the only prophet that saw God face to face in a moving way. So it ends with all the oasis, all the signs and wonders that Moses did before the Jewish people, and that's how the Chumash ends. Till the next book of Joshua, the Jews do not cross the river, and enter the Promised Land. So with these 37 days, starting from today, Rosh Chodesh Shvat, going now for the next 37 days, Moses is repeating and reviewing the Torah. The question is, what is the significance of this exactly? I mean, you can always read the Torah. Why do you need this 5th book altogether? What is the power? Why is Moses reviewing it all? So of course, a good teacher reviews, but there must be something deeper here. So the words Bairis HaTorah Azos, so the classic commentator Rashi says that he translated into Shivim Lashon. He translated the Torah into 70 languages. Basically, making it accessible not just to those that are fluent in Hebrew, but 70 languages. Which of course begs the question, all the Jews knew Hebrew there. Till now, they've only been speaking Hebrew. Why suddenly is he translating it? For whom? So you have to say he wasn't just translating for them, he was translating it for generations to come. And basically what he was doing was rendering the Torah into an accessible blueprint that anyone in any language can access. And Shivim Lashon, even for the Jews then, you can have a teacher who teaches an idea that remains abstract and inaccessible, or you can teach an idea that makes it accessible. So the 70 languages are more than just a translation into language. Most important, it's a rendering into accessible terms that someone can do something with these ideas. Later in the same book, also during these days, these 37 days, Moses will actually say a statement where he'll say, you may think that this thing, this davar, is maybe distant from you. So he says, it's not distant, it's not me'ever layam, it's not across a wide sea, it's not in heaven. This Torah, this mitzvahs, and all that comes with it, is actually relevant to you, which, if you think about it, addresses the most fundamental question of our time. Most Jews do not find Judaism relevant to them. First of all, the majority of secular and unaffiliated Jews for sure don't find it relevant. And even religious and traditional Jews, you can make the argument, also don't see it as personally relevant. You say, well, that may surprise, that statement may be a little surprising. Well, let's explain what relevance means. Many people growing up in traditional Jewish homes, you have to wonder, are they following and embracing Judaism because it's a relevant guide to their lives, or it's because it's a cultural thing they grew up with? I'm not going to necessarily call it being a brainwashed, as some people may suggest, but it's a cultural thing. You grow up with something, so obviously this is what you do. Relevance has a far deeper meaning. Relevance means that when you need to find a solution to a problem, how many Jews do you know, even the most devout, when they have a personal issue, will open up a Torah to find an answer? They'll look into the Torah, they'll say how to keep Shabbat, how to eat kosher, how to keep Passover, how to celebrate holidays, all the details of Jewish law. But what about our psychological, emotional, spiritual needs, personal needs? When we have a conflict with our spouse, when we're dealing with our own inner anxiety, when we have challenges with children, we have challenges with livelihood, money. We have we have different ghosts that haunt us, voices. Where do you turn to? So today there's this thing called therapy. Everybody's in therapy, which itself tells you something, that for someone who that clearly are not finding the answers in the Torah. I'm not going to go into a whole elaborate discussion how far the dissonance may be, but we say every night in the evening prayer, Torah is chayenu v'erech yemenu, our life and our sustenance. What does that mean exactly? So you'll ask any devout Jew, you'll ask any traditional Jew, they'll say the Torah is our oxygen. It's our sustenance. You can't live without it. You can't go 3 days, just like without water, you can't go 3 days without reading Torah, which is why we read the Torah at least every 3 days. Shabbat, Monday, Thursday, again Shabbos. But is that what it means? So how is that oxygen? Oxygen would mean that if you are walking down the street or you're anywhere and you're suddenly out of oxygen, God forbid, you're going to die unless you find air. Many people can say, I can go a bunch of days without so-called Torah, and I live quite nicely. So what do you mean that it's sustenance and it's our life? It's a nice line, and it's a nice word, but what does it mean? How many of us actually find Torah indispensable? So you'll go into a synagogue on Shabbat or holidays, and you'll see the Torah is read, every word, every letter, from a Torah scroll. If you're lucky, you'll also see people following along, and not only that, but correcting every few lines, and making sure every word is exactly pronounced perfectly. So it's very impressive, the love and the precision, the dedication to every letter. But then the next question is, if that's the case, how relevant are those letters to them? How many of us are, as I said, see the Torah as indispensable in our personal lives? It's one thing technically to follow the words, the letters, and dancing with the Torah and Simchas Torah. But what is the biggest mitzvah in the Torah? Let's take the biggest one. It's not how you dress. It's not how stringent you are on Passover or Shabbat. The greatest mitzvah is, as Rabbi Akiva says, "V'ahavta l'recha kamocha." Zeh klal gadol b'Torah, the entire Torah. Hillel said it in different words, that the entire Torah is, do not do unto others that which you don't want done to you, which is just the negative of the positive mitzvah of loving others, means not to do something that you don't like, don't do it to another. This, he says, is Zuh Kol HaTorah. The rest is commentary. This is the entire Torah. So how many people, this is their sustenance, that every second of the day, just like we can't go without a breath, every second of the day they cannot go without behaving beautifully to other people. How many people do you know like that? So you have the cardinal mitzvah of the Torah, and how many people is that's their sustenance? I'm not talking about that's our standard, and that in the book it says that's what you should be. Living that way, that whoever you meet and wherever you go, no non-judgmentalism, total unconditional love, doing anything for another person that you do for yourself. Do not doing unto them which you won't do to yourself. Is this a common thing? When you see it, it's like it stands out. So if it's our sustenance, why is this not part of the parcel? You find that many people are very devout and they criticize other communities. There's a lot of divisiveness, even religious divisiveness. I don't like to speak about painful things, begnusan shel Yisrael, things that are embarrassing about Jews, but you have to sometimes call a spade, and it's important to state it directly. So this thing we say Torah is our sustenance, even for the most devout, those that are assimilated or secular, unaffiliated, okay, they don't have a relationship with it. They've been never taught. They never recognize the relationship, etc., etc. I'm not saying it's necessarily an excuse, but that's the reality. But those that do claim that it's their entire life, does it really reflect in reality? As again, how many of us even know how to look into a parsha? Here, we're reading now about the Jews' bondage in Egypt and how they're then freed and redeemed by Moses. God leads them out of Egypt. This is an event that happened 3,300 and some years ago. We repeat it every day in davening so many times. So many mitzvahs are connected to Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, Tefillin, Mezuzah, even Shabbos, Passover for sure. Constantly honoring and remembering the exodus from Egypt. What does this have to do with our personal lives? If someone is a skeptic, and I'll play devil's advocate, even though we don't believe in the devil, but a challenging question. Why should I care about what events happened thousands of years ago in some wilderness, or in Egypt, or in Israel? What does that have to do with our modern age in 2015? Let's be honest. I have a lot of issues on my head. I have to deal with parents, with children, with spouse, with these challenges, that challenges. Why should I care? Who cares? Now, of course, you can make the argument it's important to know your heritage, your history, your background, your ancestry. Fine. But that's more like, it's good information to have. But why is that indispensable? My life and my sustenance? What's the answer to this question? Challenge any rabbi. Challenge any so-called traditional devout Jew. Tell them to answer this question. Many will say, they may say, I may not know the relevance, but I know it's relevant. It's oxygen to us. We have to follow it. But how do you explain this? If your child asks you this question, what are you going to say? Why are we following this reading of the Torah with such precision? Why is it so important? Now, I don't mean to be bringing up questions that nobody's ever thought of. I'm sure many have thought of these questions. But I'm asking the questions actually because there is an answer. I wouldn't ask the question if it wasn't. That's not the point. The problem is that many of us don't know the answer. And that's what Moses was saying in these 37 days. And that's what he began doing Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Making Torah accessible. Teaching the Jews and the people who would come, the generations to come, that this Torah, which to you may sound sometimes abstract, historical, distant, something from the past, is relevant. Karev Elecha is relevant. So Bairas HaTorah means that Moses, the master teacher, served as an interface to explain the divine wisdom of God, the divine plan, into language that we all can find accessible, even in the year 2015. And that's why it's well worth honoring a day like this, especially the Torah documents. That B'ashti Asher Chedesh, in the 11th month, on the first day, this is what Moses began doing. And if you think about it, if this is the concept of interface, what was really Moses doing, to speak in a little more cosmic terms? He was actually bridging heaven and earth. The two powers, the two forces in our lives that are often so dichotomous and so difficult to bridge. What does heaven represent? Heaven represents transcendence. And earth represents survival. So we all know what survival is. Survival means the thing we're most involved in day after day, which is paying our bills, making ends meet, finding shelter, home, finding clothing, finding sustenance, food. Everything we need to be able to survive in this world. And we hope to not just have survival, but also have a little more than extra. It's more than just surviving. So this is, in that sense, we're very similar to any animal out there, breeding, protecting its young, and finding ways to manage in a hostile world. Dog eats dog, survival of the fittest, and the battle of life, which is so much around the most stuff I mentioned, including the financial, the business side of things, money. Okay. Then there's another side to each person, which is undeniable. We all know we're not satisfied with just survival. There's an annoying feeling, a type of restlessness, an healthy angst that we sense something more than just surviving. We'll call that transcendence, the need to go beyond the here and now and experience something that is greater. And transcendence takes on so many shapes and forms, just to give a few of them. It can take on the shape of art and music. Look at music. People unplug, or plug in. You can say they detach from everything. They put on this headset. Blasting music transports them to another time and space. They dance or whatever it is. Music takes them somewhere. Music, dance, art, the different arts, travel, poetry, and of course transcendence in the form of love, romance, sexuality, intimacy. And then there's transcendence in the form of spiritual search, religion, faith. The list goes on. Really, almost any hobby a person has, it could be cooking or gardening, goes into the category of more than just survival. You're doing something that you get pleasure from, something that brings you a certain deeper calm, serenity, transcendence. And these are two voices. One is heaven speaking to you, and one is earth. Earth is earthbound by the gravitational pull of earth survival. And the other is heaven-bound. The Tzemach Tzedek, third Chabad Rebbe, was once as a child playing on a ladder with other children. And the other children were afraid to climb up to the top of the ladder. And he climbed up to the top. His Zayda, his grandfather, who was watching, Reb Shneir Zalman of Liadi, the Baal Tanya, Shulchan Aruch, who last week we honored his 202nd yard site, afterwards asked the Tzemach Tzedek, his grandson, why is it that the other children were afraid to climb to the top and you were not? What distinguished you? Listen to the answer the little boy gave. He said, when the other children were climbing, they kept looking down. So they saw how high they were afraid to climb higher. When I was climbing, I kept looking up. And I saw how low I was, so it motivated me to climb higher. These are two ways, two perspectives on life. There are people who look back and there are people who look forward. There are people who look down and there are those that look up. One of the Rebbes once said, an animal has never seen heaven. Because an animal walks on all fours. And thus its head is facing always down to the ground. Because that's what an animal needs to know. Where's the ground? Where's the food? Where's its offspring? And so on. A human being walks upright. And as thus our eyes see heaven, even physically. Su morim einechem, lift your eyes to heaven, v'ru'u mibar eila, and see who created it all. Well, when you look into heaven, you immediately aspire to understand and satisfy, to quench the curiosity. What's out there? What mysteries are out there? Just look at how many billions and trillions of dollars the human race has spent on space programs, simply to satisfy one thing: human curiosity. Animals don't really care what's going on up there. Animals live in the same habitats they lived 500 years ago. We have improved our homes, our technologies. Animals don't care about cell phones, mobile phones, smartphones, texting, Facebook, Twitter, the whole list. They don't even know it exists. They're not looking to improve anything. Their job is to survive in a very peaceful way. They can graze in the fields. If you ever notice an animal, a behemoth, a cow grazing in the field, completely at peace. And no neurosis, no psychosis, no need for therapy, no arguments. Everything is peaceful. Sometimes humans are envious, they call it with animal bliss. But we humans don't have that luxury, because at the virtue of our soul, we see heaven. And when we see heaven, it compels us to climb. So we have a restlessness, an inner restlessness. It's not enough to graze in the fields. You'll see every human being needs some way to satisfy that restlessness. Now, some people satisfy it in very unhealthy ways. Different addictions, different highs, different novelties that so-called lift you out of the boredom and the monotony of life. But it can also be experienced in very healthy ways. So here we have the two voices, heaven and earth. Now, when the Torah was given, the blueprint the Torah was meant to help us bridge these two worlds. That's why it says that God came down on Sinai and Moses went up. It's a bridge, it's an interface between heaven and earth. An interface. Can we fuse the two worlds of transcendence and survival? Now, you've had many people who preached asceticism. You want to reach transcendence, you have to be an ascetic lifestyle. You have to separate yourself. Go travel to the mountain. You cannot be living a life where you're pursuing money and honor and power while pursuing transcendence. That's a monastic lifestyle. Judaism teaches that you can find a true fusion of the two. And at Sinai, we were heaven married earth. There was a marriage between matter and spirit. In the words of Einstein in physics, E equals mc squared. Energy and matter are the same, one and the same thing. They just do different forms. And the same is true. Spirit and matter is the same thing. And we have the ability to fuse the two worlds without compromising one or the other. But how is the big question. And this is the challenge I mentioned before. For many, Torah is a heaven thing. It's up there in heaven or down here on earth, but it's not relates to my daily life. It doesn't tell me how to be a better person. Or it does tell you, but I don't know how to access it when I have personal challenges and dilemmas, as I mentioned. So Moses comes, and an entire book is dedicated just for one purpose, to create the interface, to create a language, that how you translate that heavenly language into human language. That's what Rosh Chodesh Shvat is about, the idea of that type of interface. And the value of it is tremendous. It's really the lessons in everything, to parents, to educators, to communicators. How do you convey an idea that a person who's not familiar with the idea initially should not only understand it, but own it? So this is the wisdom of communication. Good communicators, good teachers, don't just know how to spout ideas. They know how to communicate them in a way that this listener can own the idea, can go away and say, this has changed the way I think. They convey methodology, not just facts. Education is you can just impart a lot of good facts. But that's a brilliant teacher, perhaps, but it's not a real teacher. A true teacher doesn't impart facts, imparts methodology. Because if you impart facts, so the student now has a bunch of facts they memorize. But what happens when a new dilemma comes up that the teacher did not teach them? They don't have the tools. A real teacher teaches you the methodologies and the tools that even when you're not in the presence of the teacher, you have now learned how to solve problems. So which is greater? Someone solves your problems, or someone teaches you how to solve any problem that will come your way? So initially, we like the first because it's on a platter, someone else is doing it for us. But think about it. What's more empowering and what's more dignified is to have the tools to be able to solve any problem that comes your way. This is the challenge every parent has, every teacher, true teacher and educator has. How do I teach my children? How do I teach my students to not just live good lives, but to have the tools that whatever comes their way, they can find an approach. Good swimmers are not those that have swum every water in the world. Good swimmers know how to navigate. A bad swimmer is someone that comes to a situation, they don't know how to navigate, they don't have the tools. So what we're talking about here is far more than just a knowledge and information. It's about an approach to life, a Weltanschauung, as they say. It's a world outlook, an outlook that allows you to look at things in a different way. What is the difference between a trained eye and a novice? In any area, whether it's a good lawyer, a good attorney, a good business person, financial advisor, a doctor. They don't have facts, they also have the trained and experienced instincts that when they look at the same thing that you and I may look at, they'll see a pattern where we'll see nothing. They see the forces, the inside story that shapes things. They see the root of issues instead of just the symptoms. So that's what the Torah came to do. It came to teach us, to train us how to look at things with clear eyes. How often do we look at a problem and instead of focusing on the root of the problem, we focus on the symptoms of the problem? what impact it has. Seeing the root, it requires a lot more training. So Moses, the great teacher, the great communicator, was the one who was charged with this mission of taking a Torah that could seem inaccessible and turning it into accessible. And that's why he translated it. Translation, not just physical translation, literally from this language to that, but also conceptual translation. A translation that would make things, ideas, accessible and relevant and we call actionable. Things you can bring into action instead of just being a theory. That's the story of Rosh Chodesh Shvat. So this interface, of course, allows us to go back to what I said earlier, to take many, many forces in our lives. That's what interfaces are about. They're meant to make connections between things. I don't know if any of you saw, there was a TED Talk that became very popular by, I always forget her name. She was a neuroscientist. And later, the talk was called Stroke of Genius. And then later, she turned it into a book. What's her name? Doesn't matter, you can look it up. And it was a very fascinating talk. Why did she become a neuroscientist? Because her brother had schizophrenia, so she wanted to go into a field that she thought may be able to understand him better or help him. That's for motivations people have. Anyway, as luck would have it, or we don't believe in luck, as God would have it, she herself suffers a stroke, a neuroscientist. And as the stroke set on, because she was trained, she knew what was happening. So the stroke struck her left side of her body, which means it struck the right side. It struck the left side of her brain, the right side of her body. The left side of the brain. So we know there's a right brain, there's a left brain. But we don't usually understand the distinctions between them because they work in tandem, they work hand in hand. But here she had the unique experience, as she tells in this talk, to actually feel and experience a brain that's not, the left brain is not working and the right brain is. What's the difference between the left brain and the right brain? The left brain is detail-oriented. The mind has two sides to it. One is details, the details. Like you come into a room here, the chairs, the tables, you brush your teeth, that's the example she uses. So you have your hand, the toothbrush, the toothpaste. Okay. The right brain is a connector. It sees the relationship between things. So if you only had a left brain, so to speak, you'd only see details. You wouldn't know how to connect them. The right side of the brain sees everything in terms of a tapestry. I think she puts it as a field of energy. So think of it like a quilt, an invisible quilt, where many objects are lying on it, but you don't see the quilt, you only see the objects. So you could think that they're all separate. But then somebody moves the quilt, you suddenly realize everything is moving together. So you realize there's some type of unifying field that connects them all. Here she was experiencing, as the stroke became more intense, she was losing touch with the details. And she says, I saw the toothpaste, the toothbrush, and my hand, and I could not bring them together. I couldn't find a way to bring them together because I only saw them as a whole. She said everything was a field of energy. It was almost like a field of energy, but she couldn't put her hand to touch the toothbrush because details she was unable to access the details. You got to see it. It's very fascinating. And it's not, and I'm not exaggerating this. She doesn't speak about it in the context of religion or faith. She speaks purely neuroscience, the context of science and how the mind works. But it's fascinating because when you're familiar with Kabbalistic and Hasidic thought, it's exactly how the universe works. We see details, but in truth, it's all really pieces of one large symphony. Let's say a person did not know what music was, or someone that was deaf, God forbid, and they come into a concert hall and they see a 100-piece symphony, right? Orchestra, 100-piece orchestra, I should say, with violins and drums, and percussions, all types of instruments, right? And so the person who cannot hear, they just see 100 people sitting there making moves and has no clue what they're doing. Someone who can hear comes in and hears one music that's being created by 100 people. That's the difference. So you can look at the world and see many details, or you can look at the world and see a field of energy that has and comprised of many details. Now, if you think this is just some type of external example, Look in the mirror. You don't even need to look in the mirror. Look at your own body. A healthy body is the perfect example of what I just described. Is a body a unit or made up of millions and billions of parts? Tell me. So, of course, the answer is it depends what you're talking about. If you talk about technically, of course, we have arms and legs, and we have a brain and a heart and a liver and a lungs, and etc., and all the organs and limbs. When you break it down further, you also have the cellular structure, all the way to the chromosomes, to the DNA. Cellular structure, 75 trillion cells, they say, is in the human body. Trillion. It's a pretty big number. It's the only thing bigger than the American debt, which is catching up quickly. 75 trillion cells. But we don't think of ourselves that way. A healthy person doesn't say, oh, I'm a bunch of parts. We sense ourselves as one whole. And everything works in a symmetry. God forbid if it doesn't, then a person needs healing. What's the symmetry? You walk down the street and your left leg does not stumble on your right leg. And when you put a piece of food in your mouth, for some reason everything in your system knows the mechanisms all go into place that the food should go travel where it has to travel. How many mechanisms are in place when you put one piece of food in your mouth? Hundreds, if not thousands. And the digestive system, and the waste system, and on and on and on. It all works. We don't even appreciate it. That's how seamless it is. It's invisible. As a matter of fact, if someone asks you, what does health feel like? If you can answer that question, you need a doctor. Health shouldn't feel like anything. It doesn't feel like anything. It has no sensation. It just moves. It's smooth. It's seamless. So it's sensationless. All made up of so many parts working like that. So what is it, one or many? So from the way the Kabbalists put it is that God is Hashem Echad. In the most famous prayer of all, Shema, we say one God, which means one reality, not just monotheism, one God and not many, one reality, one field of energy. And Echad, in turn, has many details that it evolves into. So the word Echad itself, the Talmud says, is three letters. Aleph, Ches, Dalet. The Aleph is unity, oneness. The Ches, 8, is the number 8. The numerical Hebrew letters also have numerical equivalents. That's the 7 heavens and earth. Again, heaven and earth. And the Dalet are the 4 directions, north, south, east, west. All become part of one seamless unity. Because the divine, God, is neither a unit nor multiplicity. He's a force that is beyond both and therefore can join the two. That's ultimately the way the Kabbalists and the Hasidic masters explain it. But what we experience is the result of it. And the same thing is with nature. If the human being is a small universe, look at the large universe, the same thing. Unless we humans disrupt the flow and the momentum, nature works exactly like that, like one whole. With everything, the food chain, the way creatures multiply, the perfect balance. Everything works in tandem with each other. And even when something seems to be what we call a natural disaster, it's also part of the process, also a necessary part of the process. If the tectonic plates under the earth, the crust of earth, would not rub against each other, the earth would blow up. So an earthquake is just a result of tensions that have to be relieved. Just like the eruption of a volcano, and just like a tsunami or a hurricane. These are all part of a balance. When does it become a disaster? Is when human beings are in the way. When we place ourselves in direction. But the tsunamis and earthquakes are happening all the time, especially earthquakes. Under the water, they say every 10 seconds there's an earthquake. Minor earthquakes that don't affect anyone, but it's necessary for the balance. If we need vacuum cleaners to clean up our homes, and since hurricanes and tornadoes and typhoons and cyclones are forms of cleansers, the winds that blow, etc., etc. I mean, the study of nature has already been demonstrated. Its symmetry is beyond words, but so many details, all working, because beneath it all lies a field of energy that transcends the distinctions. And that brings me back to the interface. How was Moses able to create such a bridge? Because he was able to go to a place that is beyond heaven and earth and beyond transcendence and survival. And that is the core purpose of why we're here. You look at in businesses, Business 101 is you must have a mission statement. What does a mission statement or a vision statement do for an organization or for a corporation or for an entity? It creates utter focus. This is our mission. Here, Google has, I think, over 50,000 employees with billions and billions of dollars. One of the biggest companies. Google's mission statement is to organize all the information of the world and make it accessible. Sounds very simple to me, right? But that's what a mission is. Take one line, deceptively simple line, and it can unite 50,000 employees and billions of people on earth. Because it's focused, and that's what it does. That's what a mission is. Just think of it like a hub that connects the spokes of a wheel. Take away the hub, and it all becomes one big a great fragmentation. All beautiful systems are that way. They take many, many details and turn them into one harmonious whole. What is beauty after all, if not that? The color blue, the color red. You could have beautiful eyes, you could have a beautiful nose, you could have a beautiful mouth. Beautiful complexion. But what is really beauty? It's many forces, many factors that come together in some harmony. One color, one shade, one shape is never beautiful. What's a beautiful face? People study this. And no one really knows. No one has an answer exactly what makes a face beautiful, because it's not one feature. It's a combination of several features that just create a certain work of art. And when the right balance is there, it just elicits that sense of beauty, sense of harmony, sense of cohesiveness, of symmetry. So beauty actually is called teferes in Hebrew, harmony within diversity. One color, one musical note cannot be beautiful. It can be nice, but it's only one. It's when you have many and different sorts and shapes and forms, and you bring them in the right order, then you have beauty. So a way you could actually say that beauty is the antithesis, or I would say not the right antithesis. The alter ego of beauty is chaos. But you cannot have beauty if you don't have the potential for chaos. Because if you only have one clone, everything is the same, then we're all the same, then you're not going to ever have beauty. You'll have one color. Yes, you will not stand the risk of having chaos and divisiveness, but you also will not create beauty. Beauty necessitates diversity. And then when the diversity is put in the right order, that's a work of art. That's beautiful. So which tells us that the life itself, the diversity between human beings, that we have different opinions, we have different ways of seeing things, no two faces are alike, is really the core of what beauty is about. However, it has the potential and risk for chaos if those diverse forces do not communicate with each other. Imagine the orchestra decides everyone's going to play their own music in their own way, at their own pace. Then all you have is noise. And worse, you'll have horrible noise. Like they say, what's worse than one person singing out of tune? Two people singing out of tune. If you ever experienced it, you know what I mean? And three people is even worse than that. So we have essentially, as in Judaism, it explains there's 1, 2, and 3. Everything is in threes. So you have the first month, the second month, the third month. The first day, the second day, the third day. The first is creation of unity. The second day is diversity, which leaves room for divisiveness. And number 3 is harmony. Shalom. In Hebrew, the word shalom, peace, doesn't just mean absence of war. It means harmony. That two different entities who potentially can argue and disagree find find a common denominator that connects them without compromising them, that complements them. It's complementation. And that leads to the true type of harmony that defines a healthy life. So a day like this, the interface of Rosh Chodesh Shvat, is actually a day that gives us the power to achieve this type of fusion. And the question is, what is the secret? What is the secret? Why, if it's so simple, as I just put it, and we have examples of it everywhere, our bodies, nature, any system that works in a symbiotic fashion, why is it so difficult? So the answer is, using language of Hasidic and language is because it all comes down to, I'll introduce 2 words here, yesh and bittul. Yesh in Hebrew means something of substance, something concrete. And bittul or ayin is the opposite. It's nullification. It's substanceless, shapeless. So you'll have the language ayin and yesh. We all have our own personalities, and as such we have our egos. And when we are blinded by that, then we are blinded also to the unifying forces that connect us with others. When we're not blinded, then we can allow ourselves to see others as being part of one field that we are also part of. But that requires an element of bittul, which is loosely translated. It's hard to translate the word in English, maybe because the English language doesn't tolerate the concept. It's a sense of suspension of self in face of something greater than yourself. To use a humorous anecdote. So there was this city called Chelm. You've heard of this city, Chelm? Chelm was a town in Poland. They say wise people lived there. But all the neighbors created this, they were resentful, so they created jealous, so they created these foolish parables. And the foolish people of Chelm. And there's many of them. There are a lot of deep psychological lessons in all of them. One of them goes like this, that there was the farmer in Chelm. So Chelm was a small town, so you can imagine the farm in Chelm was also small, but it was his farm. He inherited from his parents, who got it from his grandparents. So it was his baby. He knew every grain of soil, but it was a tiny farm. One day he has a visitor from a place called the United States of America, a big town, big city farmer who has thousands of acres, and he shows him around his little farm, the Chelm farmer. And then afterwards they sit down to dinner, and the Chelm farmer says to the big American farmer, "So tell me, what do you think about my farm here in Chelm?" He says, "It's very nice and cute, but it's so tiny." The Chelm farmer is taken aback, like insulted. "It's so tiny. How big is your farm back in the United States?" So how is a guy who has a farm of thousands of acres that's his farm is larger than the whole Chelm and the whole Poland maybe? How do you answer the question? So he thought a point of reference. He said to him, "Well, my farm, it takes me all day to travel with my tractor from one end of the farm to the next." So suddenly the Chelm farmer, with an empathetic voice, with empathy and compassion, says to him, "Don't feel bad. I once had a tractor like that too." Okay. What does this mean? That if we were to pass out the questionnaire and ask, are you objective, subjective, narrow-minded, or closed-minded? How many people are going to mark the box that they're closed-minded and narrow-minded? Because part of being subjective is makes you think you're objective, of course. This Chelm farmer was not malicious, and he wasn't mean, he wasn't trying to be cute. He couldn't fathom a farm that's that large. It's just not in his realm of experience. So when he heard it takes all day to travel with a tractor, he was convinced it must be the tractor. It's not the size. That he reminded him of his own, once upon a time he owned a Shmata jalopy himself, that took all day to crank up to move from here to there. So he thought, okay, that's why it took him all day. We all have our farms. We all have our little boxes, our perspective. So if someone asks you, are you an objective person? Your true answer, honest answer would be, I'm as objective as my perspective allows me. Based on my experiences, this is how I see it. But you must qualify always based on your experience. If someone were to ask you, how wide is the horizon? And you're standing on the ground and you have no idea. And you'll say, well, it looks to me like maybe half a mile wide. You climb up the mountain a little higher. How wide is it now? Whew, wow. You climb even higher, even wider. The higher you go, the more you see of the horizon. So now when you're on the ground, you can say from my perspective, from my vantage point, this is how large it looks. It all comes down to our perspectives. And if our perspective is limited, your conclusion will be limited. And there's nothing to be ashamed of. That's how human beings are. Wise people know this. They qualify themselves this way, and that's how you grow. I realize I want to have a broader perspective, so I need another opinion. I need to speak to someone who's more experienced. I need someone who's climbed the mountain. So basically, our challenge is our own vanity and our own pride and our own sense of respect. Bittul is the key, the secret key to all growth. It means you're ready to suspend your position and your opinion and your perspective. Perhaps there's another way to look at it. Now, sometimes it's hard to do that because if we're insecure, or we feel someone's threatening us, we fight for our turf and we become very obstinate. No, this is what I believe. You'll see the smartest people, the most secure people, are the ones that have no problem hearing another opinion. Insecure people have a big problem with another opinion. Why do you need to be wrong for me to be right? Tells you that I'm not sure if I'm right, so I have to make you wrong. That makes me more right. But if you're truly convinced of your position and you really have a secure attitude, why do you need to invalidate someone else for you to be more validated? So the key to the entire process is this bittul, which is the key to marriage and the key to mediation and the key to any type of bringing diverse forces together, where you recognize that there's a greater good. Let's go back to music, the analogy of music, or the analogy of the human body, but the music. A musical composition, or that symphony that I described, the orchestra, the beauty is the harmony of many forces, of many instruments. Everyone knows when their moment comes, you need to play your instrument. But a moment after that, you have to be quiet and let the other instrument play. So every unit is indispensable, but every unit knows that it needs every other unit to be complete. If someone says, listen, it's my time now, and I don't want to give up the floor, you're not going to have music. So music has that paradox. On one hand, every element is indispensable, but every element knows it needs every other element. That's how secure people work. Now, the difference between music and human beings is musical notes have no choice but to be played the way they play it. We human beings have a choice. So each of us is a musical note, and it's your choice. Are you going to play the music with someone else? Well, you're absolutely necessary, but so is the other. And it's not a contradiction. The founding fathers, in their wisdom, actually put it into our currency. You know, besides in God we trust, there's another line in Latin. E pluribus unum. From the many, one. Pluribus is in Latin plural. Unum is one. From the many, one. Where'd they get this concept from? Straight from the Torah. You read some of the founding fathers' letters and correspondence and documents, you'll see where they got it from. In Hebrew and Kabbalistic terminology, it's called Tiferes. Tiferes is harmony within diversity. Understanding that you can have many. In a socialist system or a communist system, there is no room for many voices. There's no pluribus. There's only unum. Because one person dictates. Frankly, thousands of years of history, till 300, 400 years ago, what controlled the world? Monarchs, religious despots. It was controlled by one person or very few people. There was no such thing as understanding the concept of human rights, that all people are created equal, and we all have inalienable rights. But in Judaism, this has been the basis. God created every human being in the divine image. No one's dispensable. No one is more equal than another. And yet we all need each other. In the words of Hillel, Imena nili mili, if I will not be for myself, who will be for me? That's the individual. But it continues. Imani la'atzmi, if I'm only for myself, ma'ani, what am I? So which one is it? Are you an independent individual, or you need others? The answer is both. Like the music. Needing others doesn't mean that you're less. It means that it's a harmony within diversity. It means there's a field of energy that connects all the details. So the key to it all is establishing that element of bittul, which is why in the morning when we wake up, before we engage all the details of our lives, including survival, we say a short prayer, which is really a universal prayer. If every person on earth said it with the right intention, we would have a different world. What is the prayer? Moda'ani lefanecha, I acknowledge before you. Bittul. Humbly acknowledge. Moda'ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayim, shachzarta b'nishmasi, that you've returned my soul to me. There's one more, but the key is, I acknowledge that you've returned my soul to me, you've given me another day, you've given me another vote of confidence, that I'm indispensable, that I have something to contribute, that no one but me can contribute. And yet at the same time you realize that there are other people that also have their contribution, and each of us complements the other. So the foundation is that acknowledgement. That acknowledgement is what gives us so much power. Or you have option two. I'll just fight for my own ego. whatever it takes, if I have to grab other people's possessions, because I need to feel strong and powerful, that's an insecure person who does not have at the core a mission or a sense of indispensability. So the only way they can survive is by making others have less or trying to control and dominate others. That's the basis of how Jewish thinking goes. And it's actually a universal message for all people, not just for Jews, that you have within you an indispensable element. At the same time, you're part of a larger orchestra, larger symphony. And both are necessary. And when a person recognizes that, that's when they start getting control of the fragments of their lives. Because the details I was discussing earlier, why do they take control? Because there's no driving force. There's no mission statement. The driving force is what I just said now, that you're sent here for a purpose, and that purpose overrides everything. All the details are meant to be driven by that focused purpose, that calling. So of course then the challenge is, how do we find that calling? How do we find what we're good at and how to fit it into serving not just ourselves, but a greater cause? It's not really the theme of the discussion here, but that's ultimately where we have to get to. But it's the bittul, that's the secret. That's the secret to interfaces. Think of it even on a technological level. One of the challenges when they create a circuit, a closed circuit, whether it's an electrical circuit or other types of circuits, is that the surge of energy from one side and the other does not overwhelm the other. It's creating a perfect balance. Imagine if you have electricity flowing, it's so intense, then you close the circuit, the electricity flows, it'll burn everything out. It's called when it overloads. So the key is to have an interface that creates a regulated flow. Think of a faucet in your sink. That's the perfect interface. A good faucet. So the faucet is connected to a pipe, which in turn is connected to a main, which in turn brings water from reservoirs. Now if you did not have all those checks and balances, how those pipes feed into smaller pipes, and how ultimately your faucet, you turn it on, so it comes down as a trickle of water. If the faucet breaks, it comes flowing out of control. Small example. So interfaces, what they do is, they don't compromise the original, they channel it, they learn to harness it. That's the key to all interfaces. It's what we call an interconnectivity, a hiskalulus that's created when many forces have to work with each other. So they all have to be kept at bay to be tamed so they can communicate with each other. The art of mediation. Two people won't even talk to each other. They don't even want to go in the same room with each other. So the first step is to just get them to quiet down. Stop the bleeding, get out of line of fire. Let's somewhat lower the temperature, the hostilities. And you get them into one room. Doesn't mean they're going to get along, but they're at least sitting there. They at least can tolerate the other person sitting there. Then comes the process of teaching them, now that you could sit in the room, let's see if we can listen to each other. And people could argue, but this is a process where you slowly acclimate them to first communicating. Okay, when you speak, the other person doesn't yell. When the other person speaks, this one doesn't yell. Then comes the next step, the more complicated is we start realizing not only can we coexist, we may need each other. You complement what I don't have, I complement what you don't have. But all this is predicated on two things. That one is that you're secure in what you have, so you don't feel someone stealing something from you, or you have to steal from them in order to feel more valuable. And two, that you have an element of bittul, which goes hand in hand with the first. A sense of, it's not all about you. You're not the center of the universe. It's not only about your survival. It's about serving a higher purpose, a higher cause. When you have that, in most cases, you can resolve many issues. In marriage, in love, this is critical. It's not about finding that one dominates and one wins and the other one loses. It's by recognizing that the connection is deeper than the differences and to transcend them. That doesn't mean it's easy. Sometimes those differences can clash. Sometimes you do need to compromise. Sometimes you can come to realize the differences actually can be an asset because there's two perspectives how to look at something. That always helps solve problems when you have two perspectives. In any good business, you'll always see they want to always have a contrary opinion because you want to make sure you're coming to the right conclusion. You can't just follow one opinion. But the emotional ego, the emotional fragility, the emotional vulnerability that we experience so often blocks us. It makes us be fearful, withdraw, and doesn't allow, and sometimes doesn't allow us to express ourselves. And what happens is then others dominate, and we get silenced or annihilated in the process, which only contributes even more for our unwillingness to see beyond our box. So I'm not suggesting all this is simple, but it is a formula that works. And if you work with it and you find objective people in your life that can review a situation and give you an opinion that's not yours, and you listen to that opinion, even though it's difficult to do, as they say, consultants are people that people pay top dollar not to listen to them. So you hire great consultants, and then you always say, hey, I'm smarter than the consultant. You have this all the time. The people, bosses, because they don't want to always hear what the consultant has to say. You don't want to hear that I blew it by making a wrong decision and we lost a few $1 million last year, things like that. But the point is that that's what our challenge is. It's the self that gets in the way. And the irony is that it gets in the way of your own growth. Sometimes we are the most self-destructive because you're doing things that don't let you become greater because you're so controlling and so protective over your little turf, your farm. So that's the story of the interface of Rosh Chodesh Shvat, a day that Moses began the translation, the communication. It's very much what I feel I was blessed to be able to do, and I think all of us in our own way, and that is being a bridge, an interface, where you take ideas that may seem esoteric, that may seem abstract, that may seem very distant and irrelevant, and demonstrate how they're absolutely relevant, how they're indispensable in helping us live our lives. Here you have a whole story. This Be'er Torah. You could look at the story that happened thousands of years ago. Moses gets up, translates the Torah. Okay, nice fact. What do I care? Or you suddenly see, 1 second, this is the secret to life. The secret to be able to translate, to be an intermediary, to be an interface between two paradigms, and finding that commonality, finding a way to communicate, finding a way to connect. So it's a tremendous lesson. It's not just some thing that happened thousands of years ago. And throughout the Torah, you'll find the same idea, which has always been the theme of these classes, is to find the relevance, the personal relevance. I do this Wednesday night. Thank God I do some other classes as well. Meaningful Life Center is focused around this purpose, and that is to create that type of harmony. So, I say to all of you here, and to anyone listening in cyberspace, to me, it's the greatest gift and honor. This is how I was trained, to see the intersecting of souls meeting as being the most dignified thing you can do. Because it's the respecting the majesty of the human journey. You know, every person here, every person listening, every person on earth has their own trajectory. We have our twists and turns, the bizarre twists and turns of our lives. You all know what I'm talking about. Everyone has it in some way or form. And when you meet people, often in a world like ours, dog eats dog, it's all about what am I going to do for you and what are you going to do for me? And we'll see if it's worth it. It's all about that negotiation, that exchange. You know, you don't find often experiences that have no strings attached, where you just can meet somebody, a friend, and there's no fear that they're trying to get something from you or manipulate or outmaneuver. And that's when you respect the journey of souls, that knowing that we're not physical beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And that in essence, when we look at each other, we should be seeing souls, not bodies. It's a soul that occupies the body. And our relationship is a soulful one. So my years of work, and the years of everything I've been doing since, as I mentioned, 1982, has been meeting people, and it's a beautiful experience to see the connections that are made. You know, we meet now, we haven't seen each other for a long time. And I'd like to believe that all the people I've met, there's something that I was left with and they were left with. You know, last week I had a lot of people I didn't see maybe in 20 years, 15 years. So these are beautiful experiences because you realize there's some things in life, not just some things, the most important things in life, can be bought and sold. They're not transactional. They're not, you can't acquire them. They emerge and they're part of the process. Things like truth, love, kindness, God, faith. I mean, anything that really matters. Anything that really matters. What's on the other side of the list? Everything that is temporary and impermanent. Money, power, age, looks, the food we eat. The survival parts. But we're consumed with them. And we're so easily exchange the permanent for the impermanent, and the temporary for the eternal for the temporary, I should say, which is absurd, of course. If someone gave you two options, something that lasts forever and something that will last for a day, what would you choose? So if it was put in those terms, you'd think, I'll choose the eternal, but we don't. We choose the temporary, because we're trapped more than we'll ever know in a farm that has its tentacles around our neck, around us, very tight tentacles, that allows you only to see the here and now. And when you get obsessed, you get consumed with something that seduces your senses or seduces your heart, nothing matters. You can do things that are completely insane, that don't not logical, that are even destructive, and afterwards you think to yourself, what was I thinking? Because when we get consumed, that's what this material world has the power, as the Meraglim, the scout said, Eretz Echeles Yishveh, a land that consumes its inhabitants. You see it with people as they in fighting and litigation, money, power, all temporary things. And people put aside the eternal. You think about it logically, you step aside, step back with a bird's eye view and say, it's crazy. Who would give up something that's forever for something that's for a moment? And yet the eternal things don't have value because you can't buy them. So we worship the things we can buy and sell and so on. I think enough said about that. Everyone understands. So this is what the Arizal says is the great Tzimtzum. God concealed the truths, and the real things in life are more difficult to access. But that's why Moses and the Torah comes to remind us. And that's where the interface comes back, to find a way to bridge these two worlds, to find a way to interface eternal values in a temporary world. That even on our temporary lives, and even in the things that we value and worship that just are impermanent, to recognize and be able to elevate them to an eternal place. As I said earlier about time, moments in time, they're all very limited. But if you use that moment, it can become eternal. Think of a magical moment that happened in your life. Everyone has a magical moment. First time you fell in love. First time a child is born. Other experiences. It's one moment. You could say exactly when it happened. What second it happened. How is that second different than other seconds? Because that second was filled with life. It was filled with eternity. So the second lives on forever. It's frozen forever now. And you will never forget it. And you will communicate it to others. And they will never forget it. That's when you really bring the eternal into our lives. So you can be proud to be Jewish, because we've been here, an eternal nation, Am Yisrael Chai, over thousands of years, gone through every hell possible, and we're still standing. It's a living example for all nations of the world. Stand proud, to be proud of the Jewish people. That doesn't mean we don't have our challenges, but that element has to be recognized. So, as we enter this month of Shvat, and we make the blessings, last Shabbos should be a blessed month. It's a month on many levels that helps us create those interfaces. And I make my pledge that I commit to continue what I do, and I really feel blessed to be able to be, as I said, at the intersection of intersecting with your souls and with so many other people that I come in contact with. With the goal, of course, is bringing soulfulness into a world that is so often neglects its own source of energy, and itself prefers the pursuit of materialism with all temporary nature. But Judaism does not preach asceticism. It's about fusing our material lives, earth with heaven. That's the goal. So I bless you all to have a marriage of heaven and earth this week and every week, and find ways to do that in your work, in your material activities, the people you meet. Bring a taste of eternity there. That's what changes things. When people hear something like that. I remember a big businessman, came once to this class, and he told me that he has a case of Torah Meaningful Life, the book I authored, in his office. He says it changed everything. He's known to be a cutthroat businessman, but now, after every business meeting, every negotiation, he gives everybody a copy of the book. He says it changes the whole mood, because no one expects him suddenly to give a spiritual book. But then you suddenly see another dimension to someone. He says it creates, he feels he's sanctified his work in that sense. So we all have opportunities to bring eternity into the impermanent moments of our lives. And that's really what it's about, sanctifying the material, bringing transcendence into survival. So God should bless you all, that you should have a week of that sort, and not just a week, a life like that. If any way we can help the Meaningful Life Center and myself, please be in touch with us. meaningfullife.com is our website. And if anybody wants to dedicate classes or in any other way participate or in any way have more information, find for more information, as I said, be in touch with us. Everyone have a very pleasant week. And until next Wednesday, where we will resume here from at 8:15, be blessed. Thank you.